Hey guys, today I wanted to talk about weathering by comparing two items, one which is 3 years old and has undergone a lot of use, and the other which is the same model of item but absolutely brand new and never been worn. So if you don't know what weathering is basically the natural process an item goes through as it starts to age and be worn. For example, sweat stains, rips, tears. Basically, if you're wearing something every day, it's the damage that's just inherently done to something by you wearing it. So weathering is something that we see a lot in the clothing that we wear every day, but when we're wearing costumes or clothing to a live action roleplay event, we don't see as much weathering there since it's a costume that we're only wearing occasionally. This video is a precursor to a series we're going to publish on how you can artificially weather your clothing to make it look like you've been living in it. For example, if you're a Viking warrior, it's likely that your tunics are going to have some wear on them and they're not going to be perfectly pressed and pristine. So by looking at a garment that has been naturally weathered, hopefully we can give you an idea of what you might be aiming for when you artificially weather your clothing. So this Gambeson actually belongs to me. I purchased it about 3 years ago, back before I started working for ArmStreet. I purchased it because I was looking for something made to measure because as a woman, it's quite difficult to find Gambesons that fit properly, and ArmStreet offered that at a reasonable price. This Gambeson has seen a variety of different uses. It's been my solo method of armor protection for some things, such as HEMA. It has seen a lot of use underneath armor, usually 18 and 16 gauge stainless steel armor. And it's just seen a lot of general wear because it is quite attractive. It almost works as a tunic sometimes as well. So I have used this at least weekly for about 2.5 years. The most drastic thing here is probably the buttons. Because the buttons are made of metal and they're protruding from the Gambeson, they have the habit of getting caught on things, being pulled off. I actually pulled the buttons off of the sleeve part of the Gambeson to fit my bracers over top of, so those were just taken off by me. I've since sewed on random buttons, taken off buttons. So if your garment has buttons on it when you're weathering it, there's something to think about. Have you sewn them on stronger and reinforced them, or have they perhaps fallen off and now you may have an odd button? So the first thing you'll notice probably is the discoloration. Compared to the new Gambeson, it's a very different color. I would probably put most of this to the fact that I live in Australia. The sun is very, very strong here. It has spent time on a clothesline drying after being washed. I do wash my Gambeson fairly often. I know some people don't, but I have over its life. So I would probably put a lot of the blame on the bleaching to the sun, or also the linen does tend to lose color where armor has rubbed. You'll notice a lot of the discoloration along with a lot of the wear is starting at places like the hemline, the bottom of the sleeves, around the collar. That's something to keep in mind when you start artificially weathering an item, because those are a lot of the places that end up getting the most wear. If you think about it, because you're pulling it on and off a lot, you're using your hands a lot, your sleeves get caught in things. Those kind of actions are what leads to something being worn in those places. Most of the armor I've worn has been from ArmStreet and has rolled edges, where if you're using armor from perhaps slightly less reputable manufacturers, you're going to find that the edges are sharper and they're going to catch on your Gambeson more. I have a little bit of rubbing kind of around the rib cage, probably from my breastplate, I imagine. Other than that, it has really only caused pilling, so you can see that the fabric has a bit of a rougher texture. It's getting a little bit fuzzy from where the edges have rubbed. But there really isn't too much ripping and tearing on this Gambeson. I know other people whose Gambesons have a lot of rips in them that they've had to repair. So when you're starting to think about weathering your garments, just have a think about what you're going to be wearing over top of it and what kind of damage that may have caused. Another place where you're going to find a lot of wear is under the arms of a garment. And this is, of course, because you sweat. Now, sweating is going to cause discoloration, it's going to cause the thinning of fabric in some cases, especially if you have acidic sweat. In this Gambeson, there's a bit of discoloration, but most of what you see is just the previous sun bleaching that I talked about. If this was a cream colored Gambeson or maybe another color, you'd probably see more discoloration, a slight browning from the sweat. But because it's black, it doesn't really show up that much. I think the thing that's changed the most in this Gambeson is the texture of it. If we compare it to the beautiful new Gambeson, you can see that the linen has a real sheen to it. It's a little bit shiny, the texture is beautiful. This is because it's never been washed and it's still a little bit starchy, and that does go away with time. So you can see that my Gambeson is quite dull, the fabric is pilling, it's really lost that sheen, but it's also softened up quite nicely. So as you wear an item, especially an item made of linen, it gets close to your skin, it softens up, it starts to feel lovely against you, and the fabric does actually, because it's a woven fabric, it does actually mold to you a little bit and change shape. So that's about it. I just wanted to give you a quick comparison between a brand new, fresh off the rack item and something that's been in use for 2.5 to 3 years. Hopefully that gives you something to think about when it comes to how you might want to weather your items going forward. So I'll leave you with 2 questions to ask yourself as you start to think about the idea of weathering something. The first question is, who is your character? Are they a noble who can wear something nice and bright and new every day? Or are they someone who's been in the woods for the past 3 years and only has one tunic? And the second question is, how? If your clothing is weathered, how did it get weathered? Are you going to have arbitrary blood splatters? Or do you maybe have a very specific splatter where you got into an axe fight? So it's really just a question of, how can I make this less arbitrary and add to my character? So hopefully those are helpful questions and it gives you something to think about until we release the next segment on how you can start artificially weathering your clothing at home. Thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully this has been at least interesting for you. See you next time.